and to understand where you're returning from. That night, Abram woke up earlier than usual. Do not think the story of Yahweh belongs to just one people. And there you will try to sell yourselves as slaves. We will return. If what you were taught from childhood is only the remainder of a story whose first page was torn out. If you grew up among church hymns but always felt like something was being hidden, then pause and listen deeply. Because maybe you are not the cursed one. Maybe you are the one who carries the covenant. Welcome to Prayer Station. Maybe the ancestors the world called slaves, they were the ones who once bore the name of God before the world ever knew the Bible. Sounds absurd? Sounds reckless. But what if, is it the truth? What if the customs your ancestors kept, like honoring the Sabbath, avoiding pork, circumcising their sons, smearing blood on doorposts each season, were not tribal rituals but remnants of a covenant once lived? What if the name Yahweh they cried out in slave songs was not a product of Western theology but a sacred memory passed from soul to soul across generations? Have you ever wondered why people were erased from maps, stripped of memory, renamed, repainted their God, and relocated in Scripture? Still kept a strange conviction that they belong to something deeper, older, holier. No, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not an ethnic movement. This is a prophecy once written, now calling to rise again. A prophecy for those whose names were forgotten in history but never forgotten in the mind of God. If something just stirred inside your heart, then maybe you're not just watching a video but being called back to the name and to understand where you're returning from. We must go back to the beginning. Not when Israel came out of Egypt, but when one man not called Israel heard a voice from heaven. A voice that didn't require nationality, didn't ask for credentials, just a heart willing to believe. And from that man, a covenant began. Not through the law, not through bloodlines, but through faith. But who was he? The one who dared to believe with nothing to cling to, who left his homeland, his roots, his ancestral gods to follow a voice from a God he had never seen. He was not a priest, not a prophet, not born of a holy nation. He was just a man walking through the darkness, but within him an emptiness no idol could fill. And when Yahweh spoke, he didn't ask why. He just walked. And from that first step, a covenant was born. Not for him alone, but for anyone who carries that same faith, even you. If you dare to step out like he did, if you hear the call, do not turn back. Come with me to that beginning, to the moment when a man not of Israel's blood, he was chosen to become the father of many nations. And maybe on that journey you'll discover you're not just one searching to return. You are part of a promise that was never forgotten. That night, Abram woke up earlier than usual. The moon had disappeared behind the rocky hills of Ur, and the sky stretched out in a silent, endless depth. Stars hung bright and motionless like promises yet to take form, whispering something no human language could yet name. He stood still, eyes lifted, not because it was beautiful, but because deep in his soul he knew he was there. Abram was not a holy man. His family carved idols, worshipped lifeless statues. He was born in a land filled with the sound of temple bells, yet never once heard the sound of life, The world around him believed in gods, but no one truly believed there was one who listened. Until that night. A voice rose from within him, but it was not his own. A sound not heard by the ears, but trembling in his bones. A command that came without introduction. Leave your country, your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. No reason, no detailed promise, no map, just a command and a quiet vow that followed. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. Your name will be honored among all, and through you every nation on earth will be blessed. Abram didn't know why he believed. He only knew that if he didn't go, he would lose something irreplaceable. At dawn, he packed the tent, called Sarai, his wife, and left Ur. Told no one. Never looked back. He didn't leave because he knew the destination. He left because he had heard the name, a name that would later be carved into the memory of mankind. Yahweh. Time passed. He lived as a wanderer, moving from land to land. He pitched tents, but wherever he went, he built altars. Not too many gods, but to call upon the name of the one who had called him. Yahweh spoke again. This time he led Abram outside and told him to look up. Count the stars, if you can. So shall your descendants be. Abram looked. Sarai still had no child. He was still just an old man wandering among foreign tribes. But something unexplainable happened in his heart. He believed in what his eyes could not yet see. Believed in a God without form. Believed in a promise that could only grow in the soil of faith. And Yahweh, he didn't write Abram's name in stone or build him a golden temple. He simply looked at that faith and called it righteousness. Abram had no idea what had just begun. That from him would come Isaac, the child of promise. From Isaac, Jacob. And Jacob, after wrestling through the night with the divine, would be renamed Israel, the one who struggles with God. From that name came a people. Those people, a nation. But the beginning was never on a map. It always began with one person who heard Yahweh and didn't turn back. And if that's true, then maybe you don't need to be born into the right lineage. You don't need to grow up in a temple. You don't need to speak Hebrew. As long as your heart still has a space for a divine calling, that calling is still for you. Maybe you are a scattered spiritual descendant. Maybe you don't carry the name Israel, but the echo of that promise still flows through your soul like an underground stream that never runs dry. And this story isn't over because Abram wasn't the only one. There were others outside the bloodline of Israel, those who heard the voice of Yahweh, offered sacrifices, and were accepted by him. They lived beyond the borders. They had no names and genealogies. But they once stood before Yahweh, and he did not turn his face away. Keep going. Because if the covenant didn't begin with a nation, then the return is not limited by blood. Maybe you are part of a promise that was never forgotten. Do not think the story of Yahweh belongs to just one people. Do not be quick to confine the Almighty to one land or one bloodline. Because from the very beginning, even before the name Israel existed, Yahweh was calling people who lived outside the spotlight of religious legitimacy, yet heard his voice more clearly than many who lived near the altar. Go back to an afternoon in the valley of Shaveh. A man walks out of the city of Salem. No guards. No trumpet blasts, only bread and wine in his hands. He approaches Abram, just returned from battle, and speaks a blessing. No one knows where he came from. No one recorded the name of his father or mother. All we know is this: he was a king and also a priest. A rare dual role in the entire Old Testament. Melchizedek, not a descendant of Abraham, not from the tribe of Levi. Levi hadn't even been born. But he blessed in the name of the creator of heaven and earth, El Elyon. And Abram bowed his head and gave him 1/10 of all. The moment lasts just a few verses, but it echoes for centuries. Because Melchizedek appeared as a foreshadowing, a shadowy glimpse of the Messiah to come, one who would carry both kingship and priesthood in a single body. Then there was Job, a man not from Israel, not dwelling among the covenant people, unaware of Moses and not tied to any lineage. He lived in the land of Uz, far off in the east, amid a foreign culture. Yet within him burned one thing: reverence for Yahweh. Job worshipped in the only way he knew, offering sacrifices for his children just in case they had sinned in their hearts. No instruction manual, just a trembling heart before holiness. And when tragedy struck and his children gone, his wealth destroyed, his body in pain, he sat in ashes, yet never cursed the name of Yahweh. Instead, he said, Yahweh gave and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. No one taught him how to worship. But he knew, because that name was already etched inside him, like an ancient memory no fire could erase. And then, in the land of Midian, where Moses lived in exile, there was a man named Jethro, not an Israelite. No genealogy is recorded in sacred texts. Yet he was called a priest, a holy man, leader of a foreign people. When he heard that Israel had crossed the Red Sea, he journeyed to see his son-in-law Moses. And upon hearing all that Yahweh had done, he didn't just nod as an outsider. He stood, declared the name of Yahweh with his mouth, and said, Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all other gods. He offered sacrifices to Yahweh. He sat and ate with the elders of Israel. No one stopped him for being outside the covenant. On the contrary, he was welcomed into fellowship. Because Yahweh does not look at ethnicity, he looks at the heart. And even, there was a man like Balaam, a foreign prophet, living far to the north, in Pethor near the Euphrates River. He did not follow Yahweh, yet he heard Yahweh's voice. When the king of Moab hired him to curse Israel, he replied bluntly, I can only speak what Yahweh tells me. And instead of cursing, he pronounced blessings. He foretold the coming of the Messiah in his now legendary words. I see him, but not now. A star will rise from Jacob, a scepter will emerge from Israel. That prophecy leapt beyond his generation. It spoke of Jesus, who would not be born for thousands of years, and the man who said it wasn't a Levitical priest, but a foreigner who could hear Yahweh. Maybe you're wondering, why would Yahweh choose people outside the covenant? Why didn't he only speak through insiders? Because Yahweh is not limited. He doesn't trap his holiness inside one group. He moves wherever hearts are open. He speaks to anyone willing to listen, whether in Salem, Uz, Midian, or Pethor, whether they bore Hebrew names or not, whether they were rejected by the system. They were never forgotten by Yahweh. And the final question is, what about you? You don't need to carry Abraham's last name. You don't need to understand Hebrew. You don't need to memorize the Torah. If within you there still echoes a calling, a hunger for holiness, a deep ache when Yahweh's name is forgotten, then maybe you are like them. You are not someone new. You're someone remembering what you once knew. And that's where this journey shifts, from discovering who you are to returning and rising. Because in the next part, we go where dry bones come alive, where a voice calls out across a valley of death, and scattered souls begin to stir again. Yahweh has never forgotten you. It's just that now, He's calling you by the same name your ancestors once knew. There are words not meant to be understood right away, but to echo through time until the next generation must live in the shadow of what was spoken. Yahweh does not only speak gentle blessings, he also gives warnings, words sharp as blades, because he knows humans often only remember once they've been broken. And there was such a word spoken by Moses to the people of Israel before they ever set foot in the promised land. It wasn't a curse. It was the voice of a grieving father, seeing the day his child would one day walk away from home. He said, "If you abandon my name, if you chase after other gods, forget my laws, reject the Sabbath, and no longer fear me, then I will send you back to the very place I once rescued you from, back to Egypt. But not by the old road, by ships along a route I once forbade you to return. And there you will try to sell yourselves as slaves, but no one will buy you." Back then, the people heard it but couldn't picture it. Egypt was memory, was the past. They couldn't imagine the stench of ship holds soaked in human waste. They had no idea what it meant to be stacked like cargo. But Yahweh saw it. He saw what was coming, and it broke his heart. Then that word drifted across centuries, until one day it became history. No longer just words written in scrolls, but scars are carved into flesh. From deep within the African continent, men, women, and children of bronze skin were hunted like wild beasts. They were shackled, collared, and stacked like fish in rotting ships. No names, no voice, no freedom, only the muffled cries beneath wooden planks. Only waves and the crack of whips. Ships crossed the ocean, delivering them to a new Egypt, where chains bore no Pharaoh's name, but Pharaoh's spirit still lived on. There they were auctioned, not just once, but generation after generation. Mothers wept as they were torn from their children. Children were beaten to death for learning how to read the Bible. Those who once kept the Sabbath were now forced to work without rest. Kneeling under foreign names, the name Yahweh faded from memory, replaced by the names of oppressors. Faith twisted into a tool for punishment. They sang hymns, but deep down they asked, "Who are you? And who are we in your eyes?" They forgot. But Yahweh did not. He remembered every word he ever spoke. He remembered every child forced to forget his name. He remembered every tear shed on that ship floor, every whispered prayer in the dark. You may have grown up not knowing where you came from. You may have believed you were only a descendant of slaves, without identity, without a place in God's plan. But if your soul trembles at the sound of this prophecy, if your heart races at the mention of ships, slavery, and erased memory, then maybe you're not just black. You are a remnant of the covenant. You are a descendant of those who once called on the name Yahweh before they were forced to call him by another name. You are not lost in history. You are the evidence that the prophecy was fulfilled, and Yahweh never speaks curses without also promising restoration. So in the next part, we will begin the journey of awakening spiritual memory, unveiling the return of a people once hidden, but now being called home through the quiet groaning in your soul. If the bloodline that once carried the covenant was exiled, if their names were erased, their identities changed, their memories buried, then the next question must be, where did God hide them? The answer isn't in textbooks. It won't be found in history written by the conquerors, but it rests in dusty old maps. Forgotten stones and traditions are dismissed as strange but never fully extinguished. He didn't let them disappear. He hid them in Africa. Start in West Africa. If you've ever examined European-drawn maps of Africa from the 17th century, you'll notice something strange. In the region we now call Nigeria, Ghana, and Benin, there are 3 engraved words: Kingdom of Judah. Not a coincidence, not a random name, because these were the very areas from which masses of black people were captured and shipped off as slaves. Was that merely geography? Or did Yahweh keep a portion of his people there, waiting for the day they would awaken? Move eastward to the highlands of Ethiopia. There you'll find a small, isolated community keeping their ancient rituals, unlike Western Judaism or Roman Christianity. They call themselves Beta Israel, House of Israel. They worship Yahweh, they keep the Sabbath, they follow the laws of Moses, and they preserve a sacred book. The Book of Enoch, a book revered by early believers but later removed from the Western Bible. Why did they keep it? Because they didn't learn their faith from Rome. They received it directly through the stream of ancient covenant, untouched, untainted. Go even farther. Archaeologists have uncovered in Zimbabwe, Egypt, and even the Ashanti region, ancient stones, religious artifacts, and objects of worship inscribed with ancient Hebrew. In one Ghanaian village, inscriptions were found reading, "Yahweh is our God," written in pre-exilic Hebrew script. Some West African kingdoms once banned pork, celebrated Passover, and practiced purification rites identical to those in Leviticus. These weren't brought by Islam. They weren't planted by post-colonial Christianity. They came from something deeper. A spiritual memory quietly surviving through generations. He didn't let them be swallowed up. Though books were burned, names changed, and knees were forced to bow, a part of the truth was buried in Mother Earth. Africa isn't just the cradle of physical life. It is the vault where God safeguards spiritual life. He didn't hide them to forget them. He hid them to preserve them from the dilution of empire, from the idols of religion. Because one day, he knew they would hear the call and remember his name. And today, that dream begins to take shape, not through scholars, not through politics, but through souls beginning to tremble at the echo of Yahweh's name from the past. No certificate needed to prove it, no spiritual birth record required. Your soul recognizes him, and he has never forgotten you. And if Yahweh once hid them, then he also appointed a day to call them back, not with thunderclaps or shaking mountains, but with a quiet tug in the soul when someone suddenly asks, "Why have I always felt different? Why do I carry a pain that the Bible seems to have foretold? Why can't I shake the feeling that I once belonged to something holier?" This isn't delusion. This isn't romanticizing skin color. This is spiritual memory stirring awake. It's your soul beginning to remember what your ancestors once knew. Because Yahweh didn't just hide you, he's waking you up. And in the next part, we'll witness how sacred identity is being restored across the world. In individuals no longer defined by the history of oppression, but by the promise of the covenant. Are you ready to step the return of the hidden bloodline? If you ever thought Yahweh was only the God of Israel, if you believe divine revelation began solely at Mount Sinai, then maybe it's time to turn back to the very first pages, to a time when light had not yet been divided by national borders. Because Yahweh was already known long before the name Israel was ever spoken in Jacob's dream. Look back at the earliest days, just a few generations after Adam, as sin began to flood the human line. Scripture says, "In the days of Enosh, people began to call upon the name of Yahweh." His name was spoken by lips that bore no bloodline of Abraham, long before a chosen people existed, long before a mountain thundered with commandments. Yahweh didn't wait for Moses to speak. He had been calling all along. And then he revealed this through figures long forgotten in religious memory. Melchizedek, the mysterious king who appears in Genesis. No father, no mother, no recorded lineage. Yet he was a priest of the Most High God. He didn't come from Israel. He had no law from Moses. But Abraham, the very father of faith, bowed and gave him a tenth. Not out of ritual, but because he recognized Yahweh's name in that priest. Then came Jethro, priest of Midian, a foreigner, yet he was the first to bless Yahweh after Israel's exodus from Egypt. He proclaimed, "Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods," and he offered sacrifices, not excluded, not silenced. He was welcomed at the table with Moses and the elders. Job, a man who never lived in the promised land, had no Hebrew blood and held no stone tablets. Yet he said, "Blessed be the name of Yahweh. He gives and takes away. Even if my skin is torn, my soul cries out to him." And Yahweh himself called Job righteous. Even Balaam, a pagan prophet steeped in sorcery, heard Yahweh's voice. When paid to curse Israel, he answered, "I can only say what Yahweh tells me." He later fell to greed, but the haunting truth is he truly heard God. Which means one thing: Yahweh is not confined by bloodline, citizenship, or ritual. He speaks wherever a soul still listens. And if he once revealed his name to Enosh, if he accepted sacrifices from Jethro, if he received reverent awe from Job and Uz, then today he is still speaking to you. You don't need a spiritual birth certificate. You don't need to prove ancestry. You only need to ask, does my soul recognize his name? Because Yahweh is not limited to one ethnicity. He doesn't build walls, he calls. And all who hear that call, from any land, any culture, any point in history, they are being invited back into the covenant. And if his name was once known, if people outside of Israel could still worship Yahweh, if he once revealed himself through names erased from human memory, then why today do so many who carry the blood of pain have no idea they ever belonged to him? Why were those memories erased from history? Why was a name as powerful as Yahweh replaced in the mouths of those who once called him with their last breath? Why have generations, children of the sold and forgotten, grown up not knowing who they are in the eyes of God? Could it be that a hand deliberately erased the most sacred thing? Identity? And if that is true, who hid it? Why? And what happens when the truth can no longer be buried? In the next part, we will tear back the curtain and confront a question many fear to ask. Why was this identity hidden? Some things aren't forgotten by accident. They must be stolen, and identity is one of them. No one wakes up one day and suddenly forgets who they are. No one willingly forgets their ancestors, their language, or the name of the God they once worshipped. Someone had to intentionally erase it, because identity is power. If you know who you are, you can't be easily manipulated. You won't bow to the labels others place on you. You won't live like a victim because you know you're defined by covenant, not by your wounds. And empires, whether masked as civilized, religious, or enlightened, they've always known this. They didn't just steal land. They didn't just shackle hands and load people onto ships. They didn't just trade human beings for guns and gold. They stole memory. They changed the image of Jesus from a dark-skinned Middle Eastern man who walked the desert to a pale, blue-eyed, blonde figure, hung in churches, schools, and courtrooms. Not to glorify, but to brainwash, to ensure the enslaved no longer saw themselves in the face of the Savior. Then they outlawed Sabbath-keeping, banned the reading of Torah, banned from calling on the name Yahweh. Prohibited Hebrew rituals were once preserved by black communities across Africa. They rewrote religion, cut out the parts that spoke of justice, restoration, and promises for the scattered people. They cherry-picked a few verses and left the rest to gather dust. And so, generation after generation, a people once defined by the covenant slowly became a people without a homeland, without a name. But Yahweh has not forgotten, and He is awakening the conscience of a generation starting to ask deeper questions. Who was truly called? Only those with religious credentials? Or also those whose pain never had a name? Who was truly deceived? The one never taught or the one taught wrong? Once you begin to see this, your pain is no longer a dead end. It becomes a sign that something sacred lies buried underneath, and truth once stirred cannot stay buried. So if this identity was hidden, not by accident but by a systematic agenda, then the real question isn't, did this happen? It's, who did it? And why has the whole world stayed silent? We've seen the signs. We've heard the stirrings deep in the soul. But now it's time to confront the evidence. Not just with emotion, but with truth backed by historical, archaeological, and theological scrutiny. Because every restoration needs the light of understanding, and every truth deserves undeniable proof. Let's take the next step into the section called Expert Analysis, where each fragment of history, doctrine, and lived event will be re-examined under a new light. So you can decide for yourself, is this identity truly yours? If truth was ever buried, then Yahweh, the righteous one, left behind traces for the seeker to find. He did not forget, and history wasn't fully whitewashed. It only takes someone brave enough to dig deeper, and the truth will rise like fire from the ashes. They used to mock, used to say there are no such people, that black people could not be Israel, could not be descendants of the covenant. But then the light began to shine on lands the world had long turned its back on. Ethiopia. The Beta Israel people live in harsh mountain regions. They keep the Torah, honor the Sabbath, and eat clean foods, circumcise their sons on the 8th day, without ever being taught by European rabbis. No missionaries converted them. They've lived that way since the days of their ancestors. They didn't convert to Judaism, they never left it. South Africa. The Lemba people, mocked for their skin, claimed to be descendants of ancient Israelite priests. No one believed them, until Western geneticists stepped in. They tested them and found an unusually high percentage of Cohen DNA. The genetic marker is tied to the line of Aaron. It couldn't be faked. It couldn't be passed down by folklore. And the very scientists who once doubted were forced to rewrite their conclusions. They weren't lying. They do come from ancient Israel. West Africa. On old European maps, drawn before any Zionist movement, we see forgotten names. Kingdom of Judah, Black Hebrews, Negro land. Descriptions that read, people here observe Hebrew festivals. People here call Yahweh their God. Did you know? It was from these very lands that millions of black people were abducted in the transatlantic slave trade. Not randomly, not just for labor, but to sever the bloodline, to disconnect identity from covenant. And now that these truths are coming to light, theologians are being forced to reread the Bible with new eyes. They can no longer ignore the awakening cry from black communities, no longer dismiss it as a different Israel, but must begin to acknowledge This is the restoration of the true Israel, not by law, not by politics, but by a soul journey back to the name Yahweh. If you've ever felt lost in religion, if you've ever read scripture and seen yourself between the lines, then maybe you're not just a reader, you're an heir. And if that's true, now you stand at a crossroads. Continue living as if you're just an outsider, or step into the restoration Yahweh promised long ago. At this point, we don't need more debates. We don't need more proof. Because what's stirring inside you, it is not from man. It's a calling. An ancient call that predates pain, transcends borders, maps, and forced amnesia. The name Yahweh is still echoing, not in temples made of stone, but in the hearts of those who thought they only carried the legacy of suffering. But you don't just carry the legacy of slavery, you bear the mark of the covenant. And if today you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Let prayer be your beginning, and your yes will be the return heaven has waited for. Because this is not the end. This is the hour of return. Now we step into the final part, a prayer and a calling. Not to end a video, but to open a new chapter in your soul. Take a moment, not because the video is ending, but because something sacred has just begun within you. You didn't stay out of curiosity. You stayed because your heart just heard a calling. Not a calling into a religion, but a calling back to an identity you never knew you had lost. And if what you just felt wasn't just a fleeting emotion, but a deep stirring in your soul, then don't walk away from this moment. Let this prayer be the marker of your return. Yahweh, God of the covenant, if you are still calling the forgotten ones, please call my name again. If buried in the ashes of time, my name was once written, then today, let your wind blow. I don't need a crown. I don't need a nation to glorify me. I only ask, place me where I truly belong. Restore in me what the enemy once stole. Reignite in me the flame that once went out. And if this is the hour of restoration, let it begin with me. I do not belong to forgetfulness. I belong to your name. And today, I step out in the name of Yahweh, the one who calls me from the ashes. Amen. If you just spoke those words, know this: you are not alone. You are one of thousands, millions, waking up at the same time across the earth. And if you feel like something has just awakened in you, leave a sign, a word of confirmation, a short testimony, a question. Not so we know you watched, but so heaven knows you heard. If you know someone else searching like you, share this video, not for the algorithm, but because maybe they've been waiting for you to wake them. And if you feel like this is where you belong, a place where truth isn't watered down to please the world, subscribe to Prayer Station. Not just to get the next video, but to walk together on the journey back to your true identity. Because there are some things you're not meant to hear alone. This story isn't over, it's only just beginning. In the next chapter from Prayer Station, we'll go even deeper into what few dare to speak. Who distorted the true image of Israel? Why was this identity hidden? And what will happen when a scattered people awaken all at once? Hold on to his name, hold on to the promise, and hold on to each other. Until the trumpet sounds across the earth, we will return.